When people think security, they normally think executive protection, they think guns. You've been working a lot in the security space with the healthcare focus.
What we found up there is that the healthcare industry, these poor folks that dedicated their lives on helping people, are now victims of workplace violence, getting beat up day in and day out.
What are some of the vulnerabilities?
Vengeance type violence, targeting for CEOs, domestic violence. It's all of that kind of melting pot of everything that could go really, really right or really, really wrong that we deal with day in and day out.
Welcome to Time to Head North podcast presented by the North Group, security refined by intelligence. And my guest here is none other than Nate. Do you want me to, can I call you Circus on this or
Absolutely.
what? Because I know people call you Circus, right?
That's fine. That's perfect. Circus it is. 100%.
Would you mind telling the audience your background before we get started, if you don't mind, just a little bit of your bio?
Yeah. So my father was a lion trainer. My mother was a rock and roll singer. I kind of grew up in the circus community, and then ran away from the circus and joined the Navy SEAL teams, which was a kind of a different circus in itself, which was fun. But you don't get to pick your nickname in the SEAL team. So I got the nickname Circus, and that's kind of a long story for another day. But and then shortly after that, no one really, it was Circus forever, you know? So if you were to ask somebody, hey, who's Nate Von Ohl? They'd be like, I don't know the guy. Circus. They'd be, oh, yeah, I know that guy. So then went into the sheriff's office in Southern California, spent some time there, stayed in the reserves with the SEAL teams, and then deployed another few times, and then kind of gave up a little bit of all of that, and then became an entrepreneur, and then got into the security business. And then now that landed me at the North Group. So it's been a one heck of a ride, and it's been really, really fun.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Security, when people think security, they normally think, executive protection, they think guns, they think different things, but you've been working a lot in the security space with the healthcare focus. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yes. So it's kind of funny. I was sitting on my porch one day in Southern California, and Steve gave me a call. Hernandez, the CEO of the North Group, gave me a call, and he's like, hey, can you help me out for like 3 days? For this, we have got some trouble at a hospital. A mutual friend, from somebody at the hospital and somebody with the North Group ended up contacting the North Group. He's like, yeah, so just 3 days. I'm like, sure, I'll head up to the Pacific Northwest. So I get up there, and that 3 days turned into 5 years and counting, right? And so what we found up there is that the healthcare industry, I mean, you think about it, and just as being, a peace officer, a full-time peace officer in the past, you think about how many, like behavioral health issues that end up at hospitals, and you really, the normal person really doesn't, I don't think, put this together, but everybody that has behavioral health issues that are in the criminal element, they all end up at a hospital somewhere. I mean, it's almost inevitable, right? And so they get dropped off, and now these poor folks that dedicated their lives on helping people, right, are now victims of workplace violence, violent human beings that are, that have some serious behavioral health and violent tendencies, and they're just kind of stuck with these people. So come to find out, they're getting beat up day in and day out, and it kind of made me angry to say the least, that here's these folks that literally gave their lives to help people, and now they're getting beat up on a daily basis. So Steve and I talked about it, and we're like, how are we going to change this? So moved up to the Pacific Northwest for about 1.5 years, and we got this security model, which really didn't exist in this place, up and running to where we had layers of security. And those layers of security were, it was kind of a conflict between the culture of a hospital, because a hospital is, the best days of your life is in a hospital, and the worst days of your life are in a hospital. So the emotions is normally high in the hospital. So you want to set this cultural setting of Disney. The birds are chirping, the deer are running, the antelope. The problem is the wolves come in and start eating all that. There's nothing left. And so you're trying to preserve that Disney-like culture. So what we did is we have kind of this model of securities in the shadows to where we'll get rid of the wolves before anybody shows up, right? Or before they get on the property. And so we're very offensive in our security tactics, to where we do preserve culture. We do make it seem like Disney. And it is a safe environment by the time we're done with it, but we layer that to make it, less obvious. And so there's a lot of hospitals that have the TSA model to where you're going in, you're going through a magnetometer, you're getting patted down, you've got your, belongings going through an X-ray machine. So there's a lot of places that do not want that, and so you've really got to use your imagination to figure that out. And so that's what we've done. And I think we've done it pretty effectively in the last 4 to 5 years.
What are some, so I've been a part of TNG and knowing all this. And what I thought was interesting and something that I want to ask for the audience is, what are some of the vulnerabilities that a healthcare environment that's unique to them specifically that you wouldn't think, that the audience probably wouldn't even understand? Not understand, I'd say that they weren't probably even expecting.
So a lot of the things that we would encounter is, the obvious. We've got, folks that are on some sort of controlled substance, violent tendencies. They are, not of sound mind. So that is kind of the obvious that comes in. The other thing is a lot of, kind of vengeance type violence. Say a doctor or the healthcare facility, say their loved one died in there, and now it's like, hey, they killed my loved one, right? Now I'm going to get some revenge. And so that is a big problem as well. And you see a lot of targeting for CEOs for whatever it might be, to where that is a game changer, and it's real right now. And so what the North Group does is we've got an entire protective intelligence division to where if an individual staff member is in the hospital and they get a threat of violence, once again, we go on the offensive. Our intelligence division, we go through everything. We look for manifestos. We look for, patterns of behavior for individuals to where now we understand what we're dealing with. And it comes down to means and capability, right? Does this individual have a means and capability to do what they're saying they're going to do to hospital staff and or the hospital? So that's kind of an anomaly that is happening more and more frequently, quite honest. And so, and then of course there's the domestic violence, in hospitals. Whether it's staff, whether it's a patient that's in there that has somebody that's got, a restraining order, and they know that they're at the hospital at this point, right? So it's all of that kind of melting pot of everything that could go really, really right or really, really wrong, that we deal with day in and day out. But it's interesting,
So yeah, I imagine there's all kinds of things. And then recently in the news, obviously probably a year or so ago, I don't know how long ago, a famous CEO was killed. He was, I guess would say, assassinated by a threat. And you have all these other high level, C-suite level people that work in these hospitals. When that happened, did that raise some of the fears that they might be targeted as well?
It did, big time. It absolutely did. And so, and we're the thing that really, really, I guess, is a takeaway on that is we're doing that every day for our C-suite, our CEO. We're doing that every day, looking for these threats that are on the dark web, that are on social media. And it's kind of one of those things to where 90% or above, a lot of these assassinations, the assassination attempts, they're out there online. They've told somebody, these active shooters, they've told somebody to say, hey, we're doing this. And they're starting to raise a bunch of red flags on social media, to where it's, hey, something needs to be done. And so how do we figure this out? but I mean, we once again, we will work with local police, local law enforcement that we're very, very close with. And in the hospital setting, you have to. Very rarely is there not a police officer or sheriff's deputy at the hospital sitting on somebody. I mean, there's police cars there 24/7, legitimately sitting on somebody, to where you've got to work hand in hand with those folks. And then once again, they're not going to say, hey, we're going to look into this. You've got to really look into it yourself with their assistance, which is very, very important. And so, and we're very close to our local law enforcement community, and it is community oriented policing when you get the hospital involved, when you get the sheriff and or chief of police, and then everybody starts to work together to where we can start mitigating problems before they really happen. And then start doing exercises with them for active shooter in the hospital, right? That we've done. We've done tabletops with them. It's you really have got to be on the offensive and on your game in today's day and age. And I remember, in grade school where you every couple months you had a tornado drill in the Midwest, right? So. And coming from a small town in Indiana, it's like you would go, each class would have their own section of the wall, and you'd put your book over your head. And it was preparation for a tornado, because the chances of that happening, it was possible, right? And in some cases, maybe probable. This is the same thing in the hospital setting right now. Is what they don't have in security. Number one, they are not taking. I don't think a lot of these folks know how bad it can get in a short amount of time. And I think they don't have the training as well. And that was one of the first things we did, is set up a training department, broke down silos between facilities, because they're the ones that build all the doors, and the locks and the whole 9 yards. Then the IT, because they're the ones that, hey, the magnetometers, the latches on the doors, the locks, those are all on switch panels, to where everybody's involved. You've got to knock down all of those silos and say, listen, we need to make this a safer place together. And then once you get the buy-off on that, then the training comes in, to where now you're starting to train an ED and an ER, to where they're calling for security more and more for standbys rather than getting beat up day in and day out, to where now you're starting to train together, to where we took assaults to about 25 a month, right? On average, 25 a month to 0 to 2, right? In a 6-month period from us coming in, and it stayed there. Now there's a little bit of spikes here and there, and sometimes there's none. But on average, it's about 2 assaults a month from 25, 26. We've got one of the busiest EDs in the Pacific Northwest, or ERs, right? So what we're doing is changing the security industry for healthcare. And what I would love to do is to continue to do that. We're starting to get more healthcare clients that are seeing what we're doing. And usually it's some sort of catastrophic event, that says, hey, we're not doing things right here. We need to call somebody that knows what they're doing, right? And so it's the smart ones that call us before that are like, people don't feel safe here. People, if your staff in a hospital doesn't feel safe, that's when you're supposed to pick up the phone and call somebody.
Yeah, I have a friend she runs a pretty big hospital, and I'm excited to show her this podcast to kind of better explain like the full spectrum. Because when you say security, I think people just think someone with a gun and a badge and just walking around. I don't think people really think about the proactive approach to almost like the whole world approach, where you have everyone in the facilities working together to make it a safer environment. And I love the fact that you said that people are calling security before something happens, and like, this is a potential situation, let's get security here. I think that's a great idea. Would you be able to tell me, again, I don't want to cross over any lines here when it comes to some of the confidentiality of what happens in hospitals and whatnot, but is there a scenario that you can walk us through that, if it wasn't for you guys being there, it could have been more catastrophic than it was?
No, absolutely. I truly believe we stopped an active shooter probably, a few months ago. It was a domestic violence issue with, a patient and the patient's relative. And anyway, and this happens all the time, right? It depends on how far it's going to go. We've got a crisis response team member that's at the hospital 24/7. It's one of our models that we have there, and they are armed. And when I say that, they're there to deal with anything right now. When the police is going to do, the local law enforcement is going to take anywhere from, 2 to 15 minutes to get to the hospital. It might be longer than that in some cases. That's a long time for somebody with hate and discontent and a firearm to go through a hospital and shoot innocent people, right? So we've got the capability to deal with that in a very short amount of time, immediately, quite honest. So long story short, found out from a patient who was a victim as well, that this person was there. The victim got mad, or the victim's relative got mad that the victim was in there. The victim was like, I need help. So heads up on everybody at the hospital. They're like, hey, there's something wrong here. We started looking into it. Long story short, the subject right now was going to his car to grab a gun and come back in and shoot the place up. We intercepted him on his way to the vehicle, called the local authorities. Our crisis response team member, detained the individual. And the police came, guy had a gun in the car, didn't make it there because of our response, right? And so it's close. I mean, and that's the type of thing. You've got to have these layers in there and a means to do something. Like, and that's the whole point. There's a lot of places, I'm one of those that believe in, if you're in patient contact 24/7, especially behavioral health, have a couple tools, but you don't like rolling around, in the ED with a firearm, not necessarily the model to go around unless you're very, very trained, and a lot of this hospital security guards have training, but it's not a ton of training, and the law doesn't require it, quite honestly. So the last thing you want is for somebody rolling around in an ED with somebody, and there's a gun involved, unless they're really, really, really trained. And so, we try to separate that to where we have armed folks that are on standby, but they're not to have any patient contact. It is literally to mitigate, life or limb situations. So, I think what we're doing is working. I know it is. It really is. I believe that we've created the safest hospital security model in the Pacific Northwest, maybe the U.S., because I really haven't seen anything like it. And then our technical aspect, we've revamped all of our technical cameras and whatnot. That's a whole other animal to where those are offensive at this point.
Yeah, they have such new technology these days where AI is helping identify threats. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, for sure. And that's what we're going to hopefully beta some edge technology that we make up anomalies, right? We make up anomalies that the camera, so instead of you looking at a camera, the camera is looking for you. And so that's what the North Group does, I think, the best, is we're not looking for a Rolodex of products. We're looking for what is the edge technology that no one's ever heard about? And let's develop that, right? And help develop that to where we are on the edge 24/7 when it comes to keeping people safe. And so that's going to be interesting. And I think that's another podcast once this thing gets up and running, because this is going to be a game changer, to say the least.
Yeah, that sounds interesting, man. I was curious, if it's just to say hypothetically, if another hospital calls and say, hey, I really, really love this, I want to get this implemented into my hospital. From beginning to end, how long do you think it would take to implement this program completely in a hospital if they're interested in bringing it on board?
It depends. And when I say that, it depends on how big the hospital is, what resources they already have, right? Because the longest part of this is finding the right people for the job. And that takes a second. Once that's done, to put in the protocols, the policies and procedures, it could take a second. It just depends on what resources they have. There's not an answer. And then every hospital is different. Their culture is different. The dynamics of the hospital is different, to where what the great thing about the North Group is we are a niche security company. Like, we will look at what you have, what we think that you need. You may not need everything that somebody else has, and we understand hospitals are on budgets. Some of them are private. Some of them are, get paid by the taxpayers. we understand that is a responsibility, and there really is not much. Well, what it seems is there's not much return on investment on a security system until it fails and you get sued 9 ways from Sunday because it wasn't there, right? And so that's what we're there to do, is to mitigate risk, but more importantly, keep everybody safe, so they can concentrate on medicine.
Absolutely, dude.
Yeah, so they can concentrate on medicine and not worried about, am I going to get beat up going to work or at work or coming home?
Yeah, that's crazy. That's something you never think you want your medical professional ever to have to deal with. And just in recent years, it's become a serious issue. And that's why I think it's just interesting that I think it's funny how security works. People call to get security after an event happens, because then like, oh, we should probably implement new security protocols. So everyone's, they're not proactive, right? They're reactive.
That's right. That is right. And if I had to, the way you find out how well your security is working is do a survey to all your employees in the hospital. And if they're saying, we don't feel safe here, listen to them, because that's a problem. That's a legacy. That is a legacy. And that any CEO would not want is, my people didn't feel safe. My folks didn't feel safe in their work environment that I control, right? And so we were very fortunate and had a great CEO that understood that and legitimately made that place the safest hospital in the Pacific Northwest. And I'll take the Pepsi challenge with anybody. We've got the best system out there. I promise you that. But listen to your folks. That's what I was saying.
Man, that is awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome, brother. Oh, man, dude, I really appreciate you coming on and telling us everything about it, man, because the healthcare system security is so foreign to me. I've worked in very different security setups, and thinking about the healthcare world, I mean, just go to a VA and you see what they have. It's very different as well. The VA has a couple people at the front door, and that's about it. Yeah. I don't think there's anything anywhere else. And so I just find it an area of, man, I've just never even thought about it, that it was even a need for it. But now that hearing this, I see all the different things. And I think about the movie. There was a movie with Denzel Washington where he locked himself in the prison to try and, out of essentially resentment because he wasn't getting the transplant that he wanted for his son. Right. And I started thinking about all of that, like, man, it could be a very crazy place. And that was actually based on a true story. So that's why I thought it was kind of fascinating. But honestly, Nate, really appreciate your time here, man.
No, same thing with you. Yeah, Vince, this has been awesome. It's good seeing you again. We'll have to catch up here. It sounds like, we'll have to catch up here really, really soon.
Yeah, life's been a little crazy, man, but it's been good. So either way, I'll hit you up soon. But thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much, audience, for listening to Time to Head North podcast, brought to you by the North Group, security refined by intelligence. And if you're a hospital or anyone who works in the medical field or interested in getting some kind of survey done on your facility, please contact the North Group so we can get that done for you. All right. Take care.
You're awesome. Take care.